Keith, thanks for joining me. What does this say about the regional opposition to Labor's renewables pipe dream?
Before I get to the politics of it, can I just say that I don't support shouting down anyone, whether it's the Prime Minister, the opposition leader. I think as the election comes, I hope for a civilised debate. This isn't a sporting match, it's politics, it's people's future. So let's listen to the Prime Minister, let's debate him, but let's not shout each other down. But I can see how the politics is written in a way that would make him feel uncomfortable, and that's a separate question.
But I mean, he's gone there. They've announced this wind farm off the coast. The locals are clearly very, very unhappy. According to one of them, there's 60% in that regional community that don't want this. But that has to stand for something, though, that this pipe dream is being built offshore. They're carving up the regions. Has the Labor listened to regional communities?
And that's right, that's the substance of the point. So people might express their frustrations another way, and I don't support that method, but the substance of their frustration is a valid one. And perhaps it's because they're not being listened to in other ways. And there are an important obligation on us as decision makers, us in the opposition, and certainly the government, to have a social licence for any change. And when you're going to make changes as big as this, the social licence is from the community that are directly affected. And as we see this massive rollout around the country, I'm hearing from my colleagues, particularly those in rural and regional areas, that they are not being listened to. So I think the government needs to treat them with more respect and listen to them. And if they don't, well, then they will pay for that at the ballot box.
Yeah, and meanwhile, one of Australia's first commercial wind farms, Codrington in Victoria, will be decommissioned due to the cost of replacing ageing turbines. Keith, are we now seeing real issues with these wind farms? And this one only lasted 25 years.
That's right. And we've been dealt this fantasy that renewable energy, it will solve everyone's problems, it's cheap and there are no consequences. But whatever way you cut the energy transition, it is expensive and it's going to take a long time. And when I recently visited a manufacturing plant that made these wind farms, and they advertise in their brochures that they're only supposed to last for 20 years. And that drops when you go near coastal areas with salt erosion. And the materials that are required to upgrade these, particularly 2 decades on, means that the technology has moved, the transmission lines are not appropriate. So there are enormous costs and inefficiencies in replacing these, and we have to factor those into the costs. But when you listen to Chris Bowen talk about this fantasy world, he ignores that. And he doesn't face up to the reality of what we actually have to face when we replace ageing plants like this.
Absolutely, and this is not what Labor will tell you, that you have to replace the plants after a certain amount of time, and that's the issue here. Now, Keith, I want to ask you about the NDIS. The Minister, Amanda Rishworth, says there will be no tightening of which disabilities are eligible for the $44 billion scheme, despite the government facing a mammoth effort to rein in costs. Instead, Labor will launch a new panel to review contestable services and programs participants are using. Now, Keith, look, there's no doubt this scheme is a behemoth. It was originally only designed for the most severely disabled. Now we've got rorts galore. 45% of the 600,000 participants have autism, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. Now, don't get me wrong, this scheme is critical to a lot of people, yes, but Keith, how can there be no tightening of disabilities when you've got 45% of people claiming an autism diagnosis?
Making sure that the NDIS is run efficiently isn't just about saving taxpayers' money, and that's extremely important. It's about giving the scheme a future, because if it's going to continue to have blowout after blowout every year, there won't be an NDIS for our children. It won't exist because we can't afford it as a nation. And you don't need to ask the coalition that. Go to the intergenerational report, which was published in August in 2023. It said that it is one of the top line items that will blow out the Commonwealth budget, to the point that on today's dollars, you would have Commonwealth spending hit $40,000 per person in Australia. Now, the median salary, so half of all Australians, are on $65,000 or less. That is just totally unsustainable. So it's not a binary choice of, get rid of essential services or keep it as is. There are ways to find efficiencies, but you must start with the will to find them. And this new minister doesn't have that will.
Nope, clearly it's just getting worse, and all at the expense of taxpayers again. Keith Wolahan, nice to catch up. Thank you very much for joining me on the show this evening.